The dust swirled across the barren plains like a dancer's skirt as Gabriella Anderson watched her dying father take his final breath. Her two younger sisters huddled beside her in their humble farmhouse in Wyoming Territory, 1875. The three young women, Gabriella, 22, Beatrice, 19, and Caroline, 18, clung to one another as the reality of their situation crashed down upon them. Alone on a failing homestead with winter approaching and not a soul for miles to aid them. "What'll we do now, Gabby?" whispered Caroline, her golden hair falling in tangles around her tear-streaked face. Gabriella squeezed her sister's hand, her own heart breaking even as she tried to appear strong. "We'll do what Pa would want, we'll survive." But survival seemed an impossible dream in the weeks that followed. Their crops had failed for the second year running, and the meager livestock they possessed wouldn't see them through the harsh Wyoming winter. Each night, as the howling winds rattled their cabin's thin walls, Gabriella would unfold their father's old map and trace her finger along the route to Hope Valley, a settlement he'd spoken of often a place of fertile land and new beginnings. "We can't stay here," Gabriella announced one morning as frost coated the windows. "We're going to Hope Valley." Beatrice, the practical one with her dark braids and skeptical eyes, frowned. "Hope Valley, that's nearly 200 miles south, and with what wagon, what supplies?" "With whatever we can carry," Gabriella answered, her resolve hardening. "Pa always said Hope Valley was where we should have gone in the first place." Caroline, ever the dreamer, brightened. "They say there's gold in those hills and real houses with glass windows." What they didn't have was a guide. The trail was dangerous, cutting through territories still contested by native tribes and patrolled by outlaws who preyed on vulnerable travelers. Then, as if Providence itself had heard their prayers, a stranger rode into their yard 3 days later. Xavier Wells sat tall in his saddle, the sun casting long shadows behind him as he approached their cabin. His face was weathered by years under the open sky, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples despite being no more than 30. The badge pinned to his leather vest marked him as a lawman of some sort. "Afternoon, ladies," he called, removing his hat respectfully as he dismounted. "Marshal Wells. I'm tracking a gang that might have passed through these parts, stole Army payroll 2 counties over." Gabriella stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "We haven't seen anyone, Marshal. Our pa just passed and we've been alone." Something in the Marshal's eyes softened. "My condolences, it's no country for 3 women alone." He glanced at their meager property. "You planning to stay on?" "No," Gabriella said, meeting his steady gaze. "We're heading to Hope Valley as soon as we can manage it." The Marshal's eyebrows lifted. "Hope Valley, that's a fair piece from here and not an easy journey." "We know," Beatrice interjected, "but we've got nothing left here." Xavier Wells studied them for a long moment, his hand absently stroking his horse's neck. "I'm headed in that direction myself, after I finish this business with the Blackwater gang." He hesitated, then added, "I could escort you ladies if you're determined to go." Gabriella felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest, hope perhaps, or something more. "Why would you do that for strangers, Marshal?" His smile was small but genuine. "Because my mama raised me right, Miss Anderson, and because no one should have to make that journey alone." It took 5 days for Marshal Wells to return, during which time the sisters packed everything they could carry and sold what they couldn't. He arrived with a pack mule in tow, his expression grim but satisfied. "The gang's been dealt with," was all he said of his business, but the fresh bandage visible beneath his shirt sleeve told its own tale. They set out at dawn the following day, the sisters on foot while the Marshal rode ahead, doubling back frequently to ensure they were managing. By midday, Gabriella's feet were blistered and Caroline was struggling to keep pace. Without comment, Xavier dismounted and insisted that Caroline ride while he led the horse. "A gentleman would offer the horse to all of you ladies in turn," he explained when Gabriella protested. "But a practical man knows we need to make good time before the mountain passes fill with snow." That night, as they camped in a small grove of cottonwoods, Gabriella found herself watching the Marshal as he tended the fire. His movements were efficient, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Have you been to Hope Valley before?" she asked, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. He nodded, settling across from her. "A few times. It's growing fast. Got a proper sheriff now, not just a town marshal. Good farmland in the valley, though most newcomers are chasing rumors of silver." "Is there silver?" His chuckle was low and warm. Enough to keep hope alive, not enough to make most men rich. He studied her face in the firelight. "But you're not looking for silver, are you, Miss Anderson?" "Gabby," she corrected softly. "And no, just good earth and a chance to start over." Something in his expression shifted, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps. "Well, Gabby, there's plenty of that in Hope Valley, land that'll grow near anything if you treat it right." The sisters fell into a rhythm as they traveled, days blending into one another as they followed the Marshal south. He taught them to read the trail, to identify which berries were safe to eat, how to find water where none seemed to exist. At night, he'd share stories of his life as a lawman, or sometimes play harmonica tunes that reminded Gabriella of the dances her parents had attended when she was small. It was during their second week of travel when disaster struck. They'd been following a narrow path along a ridgeline when a rattlesnake spooked Xavier's horse. The animal reared suddenly, throwing the marshal to the rocky ground where he landed with a sickening crack. "Xavier!" Gabriella cried, rushing to his side while Beatrice struggled to calm the frightened horse. He was conscious but pale with pain, his left leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. "Broke it," he managed through gritted teeth. "Clean through by the feel." The sisters worked quickly, using branches to splint his leg while he directed them through waves of pain. When it was done, they faced the grim reality of their situation, still a week from Hope Valley with their guide now unable to walk. "You should go on without me," Xavier said that evening, his voice tight as Gabriella changed the dressing on a gash along his temple. "Take my horse and the supplies, I'll manage." "We're not leaving you," Gabriella stated firmly, her eyes meeting his. Beatrice nodded in agreement. "Pa always said Andersons don't abandon those who have helped them. Besides," Caroline added with a small smile, "we'd probably get lost within a day." That night, after her sisters had fallen asleep, Gabriella sat beside Xavier, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Why did you really agree to guide us?" she asked quietly, the truth this time. He was silent so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he sighed. "Because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself, determination, grit." He turned his head to look at her. "And maybe because I've been wandering too long, chasing outlaws and never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." "And Hope Valley," she prompted, a smile ghosted across his lips. "I've got a small parcel there, nothing fancy, just enough land for a cabin and maybe some horses. Bought it 3 years ago, thinking someday I'd settle down, never quite got around to it." Gabriella felt her heart quicken. "So you weren't just passing through?" "No," he admitted. "I was heading home for good this time." The next morning brought new challenges. Xavier fashioned a crude crutch from a forked branch, but it was clear he couldn't ride without risking further injury to his leg. Together, they constructed a travois that could be pulled behind his horse, where he could lie relatively flat. Progress was agonizingly slow. Gabriella led the horse while her sisters carried what supplies they could to lighten the animal's load. Each night, Xavier's fever seemed to worsen, and Gabriella feared infection had set in. On the third day after his fall, they encountered a Shoshone hunting party. Gabriella tensed, remembering stories of raids on isolated homesteads, but Xavier spoke to them in halting phrases of their language. To her amazement, the hunters not only didn't threaten them but offered assistance, examining Xavier's leg and applying a poultice of herbs to the wound. "How did you know they'd help?" Beatrice asked that night as Xavier's fever finally broke. "Not all native folks are hostile," Xavier explained, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Many are just trying to survive, same as us. The Shoshone in these parts have mostly peaceful relations with settlers who respect their hunting grounds." Caroline, who'd been unusually quiet since the encounter, suddenly asked, "Is it true what they said about Hope Valley, that there's been trouble there?" Xavier's expression grew serious. "What kind of trouble?" They said men came and took land that wasn't theirs to take, that there was fighting. Xavier sighed heavily. There's been some conflict, yes. A man named Harrington arrived about a year ago with dreams of building a cattle empire. He's been pushing smaller homesteaders off their land, claiming he has deeds to property that folks have been working for years. Gabriella felt her heart sink. What about your land? It's safe enough for now. It's in the upper valley, away from the grasslands Harrington wants for his herds. He reached out to squeeze her hand. Don't worry, Hope Valley's still a good place. It just needs good people to stand against men like Harrington. The remainder of their journey was arduous but uneventful. Xavier's leg began to heal, though he remained confined to the travois most days. As they descended into the foothills, the landscape changed dramatically, the sparse plains giving way to pine forests, and eventually the lush valley that was to be their new home. Hope Valley lived up to its name. Nestled between towering mountains, its fertile bottomlands were crisscrossed with clear streams. The town itself was larger than Gabriella had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, including a general store, a church, and even a small schoolhouse. As they approached the town limits, Xavier insisted on riding properly into town. Appearances matter, he explained as Beatrice and Caroline helped him mount. If Harrington's men see me laid out like an invalid, it'll only encourage them. They made quite a sight as they rode down the main street. A dusty lawman with a splinted leg, followed by 3 exhausted but determined young women. People stopped to stare, and whispers followed in their wake. At the sheriff's office, they were greeted by a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard. "Wells, thought you'd given up on us," he boomed, then noticed Xavier's leg. "What in tarnation happened to you?" "Took a fall, Sheriff Davis. These ladies saved my hide." Xavier made introductions, explaining the sisters' situation. Sheriff Davis tipped his hat respectfully. "Any friend of Wells is welcome in Hope Valley, ladies, though I should warn you we've had some troubles lately." "Harrington," Xavier stated flatly. The sheriff nodded grimly. "Getting worse. He's brought in more gunmen. 3 homesteads burned last month when folks wouldn't sell." Xavier's jaw tightened. "My place, untouched so far, it's not prime grazing land and you've got clear title." The sheriff glanced at the sisters. "You ladies planning to homestead?" Gabriella squared her shoulders. "Yes, if there's land available." Sheriff Davis scratched his beard thoughtfully. "There's a place might suit, belongs to the widow Jensen. She's moving east to live with her daughter, looking to sell quick. It's good land, about 2 miles from Xavier's place." Hope blossomed in Gabriella's chest. "We'd like to see it." The Jensen homestead was everything they'd dreamed of and more. A sturdy cabin with a real stone fireplace, a barn that needed only minor repairs, and 10 acres of fertile land with an orchard of apple trees already bearing fruit. Mrs. Jensen, a kindly woman with work-worn hands, seemed delighted at the prospect of selling to the sisters. "It's been lonely since my Henry passed," she confided to Gabriella as they toured the property. "This land needs a family, needs children's laughter. My asking price is fair. I'd rather sell to good people than get top dollar from Harrington's vultures." The sisters pooled the money from selling their Wyoming homestead and the small amount their father had saved. It was just enough to buy the Jensen place with a little left over for supplies. Xavier insisted on staying at the town hotel until his leg healed properly, though he rode out daily to help the sisters settle into their new home. Under his guidance, they repaired the barn roof, mended fences, and prepared for their first planting come spring. It was during these weeks that Gabriella found herself drawn more and more to the quiet lawman. He spoke little of his past, but his actions revealed his character, his patience teaching Caroline to shoot a rifle for protection, his gentle encouragement when Beatrice's bread failed to rise, his unwavering respect for Gabriella's decisions about their farm. "You're good at this," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold. "Farming, I mean, you have a feel for the land." Gabriella smiled, pleased by his praise. "Pa taught us well. He wasn't much for books, but he knew growing things." "I've been thinking," Xavier said after a comfortable silence. My place is just sitting empty and it's good grazing land. If you ladies wanted to run some cattle, we could work something out." Her pulse quickened. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Marshal Wells?" His eyes, warm in the fading light, held hers. "Among other possibilities, Miss Anderson." Before she could respond, the thunder of approaching hooves shattered the moment. 5 riders appeared at the edge of their property, led by a man whose fine clothes and imperious bearing marked him as someone of means. Xavier stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Gabriella. "Harrington," he said softly as the riders approached. The man reined in his horse, looking down at them with undisguised contempt. "Wells, heard you were back, and these must be our new neighbors." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies, I'm Theodore Harrington. I own most of the valley." "Not this part of it," Gabriella replied firmly. Harrington's smile tightened. "Not yet, but I'm a patient man. I came to make you an offer twice what you paid the Jensen woman. Save yourselves the backbreaking work of farming. This is cattle country." Xavier's voice was dangerously calm. "They're not selling, Harrington, and neither am I." Harrington's gaze shifted to Xavier, hardening. "The offer wasn't for you, Wells. You've been a thorn in my side long enough." He turned back to Gabriella. "Think about it, miss. Farming's a hard life for women alone. Accidents happen all the time." The threat hung in the air as Harrington wheeled his horse and rode away, his men following close behind. "He'll be back," Xavier said grimly, watching them go. Gabriella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What do? We prepare." Xavier's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "And we stand our ground." Word spread quickly through Hope Valley about Harrington's visit to the Anderson homestead. To Gabriella's surprise, neighbors began appearing at their door, farmers and shopkeepers bringing food, offers of help and warnings. "Harrington doesn't make idle threats," explained Mrs. Hollister, the baker's wife, as she delivered a basket of bread. "Last spring, the McKinneys refused to sell. Their barn burned a week later. Sheriff Davis rode out to check on them, bringing news that Harrington had hired more men. "I can't be everywhere at once," he admitted, "and the territorial judge won't be through for another month." Xavier took to staying at the Anderson homestead, sleeping in the barn despite his still healing leg. Each night, he taught the sisters more about defending their home, how to barricade doors, where to position themselves if trouble came, signals they could use to call for help from neighbors. Through it all, Gabriella found her admiration for Xavier deepening into something more profound. He never spoke of leaving, never reminded them that his job as a marshal might take him away. Instead, he worked alongside them as if their future was intertwined with his own. "Why didn't you settle here before?" she asked him one afternoon as they mended a section of fence together. "You've owned your land for years." Xavier drove a post into the ground before answering. "Never had a reason to stay in one place. My job meant moving where I was needed. And now," his eyes met hers, intense and honest, "now I have a reason to plant roots." The confrontation they'd been dreading came 3 weeks after their arrival. Beatrice spotted the smoke, first a thick black column rising from the direction of their nearest neighbor, the Wilkins family. Xavier saddled his horse immediately. "Stay here," he ordered, checking his revolver. "Barricade the doors after I leave." "No," Gabriella said, already reaching for her father's old shotgun. "The Wilkins have children. We're going too." They arrived to find the Wilkins barn engulfed in flames, and 3 of Harrington's men holding the family at gunpoint while 2 others ransacked the house. Without hesitation, Xavier fired a warning shot into the air. "That's far enough," he called, his marshal's badge glinting in the sunlight. "Drop your weapons," one of the gunmen laughed. "You're outnumbered, Wells. Ride away while you still can." What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. Shots were exchanged, and Gabriella found herself returning fire as Beatrice helped Mrs. Wilkins and her children to safety behind an overturned wagon. Caroline, proving surprisingly steady under pressure, managed to wound one of Harrington's men in the shoulder. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Harrington's men were dead, 1 wounded, and the others had fled. Xavier had taken a bullet to his arm but insisted it was just a graze. The sheriff arrived with several townsmen, alerted by the gunfire. After hearing accounts from all present, he deputized Xavier on the spot. "This has gone far enough," he declared. "We're going to Harrington's ranch today." The group that rode to Harrington's sprawling ranch house numbered 20 men and women, including all three Anderson sisters. They found Harrington on his porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand and two gunmen flanking him. His smirk faded as he registered the size of the group confronting him. "What's the meaning of this, Sheriff?" Sheriff Davis dismounted slowly. "Theodore Harrington, you're under arrest for ordering the attack on the Wilkins homestead, arson, attempted murder, and a list of other charges I'll be happy to read to you on the way to jail." Harrington's face darkened with rage. "This is my valley. I built something here while the rest of you scratched in the dirt like chickens." "No man is above the law," Xavier stated, his voice carrying across the yard. "Not even you, Harrington." For a moment it seemed Harrington might order his men to fight, but as he looked at the determined faces of the townspeople, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're making a mistake," he muttered as the sheriff cuffed him. "There are more men like me coming. You can't stop progress." "Maybe not," Xavier replied, "but we can make sure it happens honestly." The weeks that followed were filled with change. Harrington was sent to Denver for trial, his ranch and holdings temporarily placed in the hands of a court-appointed administrator. Many of the smaller homesteaders whose land had been seized were able to reclaim their properties, though some had already left the territory. For the Anderson sisters, life settled into a rhythm centered on their growing farm. They planted their first crops, acquired a small herd of milk cows, and became fixtures in the community of Hope Valley. Caroline began teaching at the small schoolhouse, while Beatrice discovered a talent for cheesemaking that soon had merchants from as far as Denver placing orders. Xavier's leg healed fully, and he accepted the position of town marshal, allowing him to stay in Hope Valley permanently. His visits to the Anderson homestead remained frequent, though Gabriella noticed his attention focused increasingly on her rather than the farm itself. It was on a perfect autumn evening, with the valley ablaze in gold and crimson, that Xavier finally spoke what had been in his heart for months. They had ridden to his property, where he'd begun construction on a cabin of his own. "What do you think?" he asked as they surveyed the half-finished structure. Too small, Gabriella walked through the framed walls, envisioning what it would become. "It's a good start, room to add on when needed." Xavier watched her, his expression soft with an emotion she'd come to recognize. "That's what I was thinking, room to grow." He approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. "Gabby, I've been a wanderer most of my life, never thought I'd find a place that felt like home or people who felt like family." His voice roughened with emotion, "But I found both here in Hope Valley." Gabriella's heart thundered in her chest as he continued, "I'm not a wealthy man. I have this land, my badge, and the reputation I've built. But if that's enough, I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Tears sprang to her eyes as she squeezed his hands. "It's more than enough, Xavier. I fell in love with you somewhere between Wyoming and here, watching how you treated my sisters with respect, how you stood for what's right even when it was dangerous." His smile lit his entire face as he pulled her gently into his arms. "Is that a yes, Gabby Anderson?" "Yes," she whispered before his lips found hers. Their wedding the following spring was a community celebration. The entire town turned out to witness the union of their Marshal and the eldest Anderson sister. Beatrice and Caroline stood proudly beside their sister, both having found their own places in Hope Valley, Beatrice courting the young blacksmith, and Caroline flourishing as the town's teacher. As night fell and lanterns illuminated the town square where their wedding dance was held, Xavier pulled Gabriella close. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "About following a broken-down lawman to Hope Valley." Gabriella looked around at the community they'd become part of, at her sisters laughing with friends, at the home they'd built together. "Not one," she assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Every step of that journey led us exactly where we were meant to be." 2 years later, Gabriella stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Xavier teach their son to ride his first pony in the yard. Beatrice and her husband had built their own home just down the road, while Caroline had married the town doctor and lived in town. Hope Valley had grown too, with a proper hotel, a bank, and even talk of the railroad coming through eventually. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Gabriella would remember that desperate young woman who had set out from Wyoming with nothing but hope and her sisters beside her. The journey had been harder than she'd imagined, but the destination had proven more rewarding than she'd ever dreamed. As Xavier looked up and caught her watching, his smile warmer than the summer sun, Gabriella knew with absolute certainty that following this cowboy's trail through the valley had indeed led them straight into hope and into a love that would sustain them for all the years to come.